Hello there and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I am your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and I am the founder of Utrema Limited, and we invented a product called Gold Leaf, or liquid gold as it's called in the UK, and it contains every essential nutrient that plants need to grow and thrive. And I said there are some products on the market in a previous episode that claim to contain 90 elements or 70 elements. And I said this was absolute bullpoo because you can't do that and not include toxic elements. Certainly can't even do that and include non-radioactive elements. And said that plants only need really 12 nutrients in a fertilizer to grow perfectly well. Yes, they might need a very, very small amount of sodium and chlorine, but they will get that from the grow media and from the tap water or the water you apply it to. You do not need to add any of that. And so I always said, be wary of that. However, there are certain nutrients that humans need for optimum health that can be added to crops and food and can be included in food that are not needed for plant growth. And you'll often see that iodine is added to salts, for example, for biofortification. And selenium, in animal feed, you get selenium-enriched yeast, which is bioavailable, and that's needed to prevent a number of diseases in animals. Livestock. So biofortification. Now, it's obviously better to add it naturally and let the plant absorb it than it is to sort of add it as an artificial ingredient. And so you can actually increase the levels of various micronutrients required in plants by adding them in the hydroponic fertigation solution. That's one of the beauties of hydroponics, is you can add it directly to the stream, to the roots for uptake, whereas in soil cultivation, you can't really do that. Now, obviously, things like iron and other micronutrients might be needed, I'm trying to think. Obviously, calcium, things like this, they're very important for human health. They're already plant nutrients, so they're already going to be in the fertilizer solution, but you might add more to increase their levels beyond what is optimum for the plant. They might be hyperaccumulate it, for example. But things like iodine and selenium, you can add them. You can add a soluble version of them. Lettuce and basil can be biofortified by adding iodide or iodate forms of the nutrient. So various oxidation levels of them. So iodate is IO3 and iodide I-. That's all I've got for that. So they're added. You can purchase those and add them to Biofortify yield and would provide respectively 22 to 25% of the recommended daily dose of iodine if somebody ate 50 grams of iodine biofortified lettuce. So could really help with human health. That's really good to know. Selenium-enriched nutritional solutions can raise selenium levels in leafy vegetables, lettuce and basil, that's been demonstrated, and can also affect quality and shelf life depending on the dose and the species. You have to be really, really careful though with selenium because it is toxic to humans in anything other than background levels. So you would only do this if you were a professional horticulturalist who has studied the health effects and the exact levels required. You wouldn't want to mess around with selenium salts because you could poison yourself or your consumers if you did that. As I said, iron and zinc biofortification, and so they will be there as fertilizer, but you might add more. Iron and zinc fertilizers you can often buy off the shelf. We have one called Ultimate Iron, and it's got a nice picture of a lawn on it because iron is crucial for lawn health, and so they often add extra iron. So that's important. So iodine, selenium, iron and zinc, they're the main ones that are biofortified. I once talked to a professor at Nottingham-Trent University, Gareth Cave, and he said that if the reason potatoes are not classed as a vegetable in the UK for your 5 a day, what you should healthily consume, is because they don't contain enough micronutrients. And if they contain more iron, then they could potentially be classed as a vegetable, a stable vegetable that you could include in your 5 a day for a healthy diet. So selenium, iodine, non-essential elements that could be good nutrients for a food crop. Perhaps we should have a version of Gold Leaf, or liquid gold as it's called in the UK, which have those in. We've thought about it as well for silicon as well, because that's another non-essential element that is good for plant growth, but not essential. but never really got around to many trials looking at that, because you can simply add silicon by adding potassium silicate. And the beauty of gold leaf is it brings the pH down, whereas normally hydroponic fertilizers, the pH would rack up crazy if you added potassium silicate. I guess potassium silicate could help the human health as well. A crop that was very high in silicon would produce a lot of fiber, and more fiber than normal. And fiber is going to be one of the key things going into 2026 that will be a lot of interest in, because more people will be on weight loss drugs. The GLP inhibitor, the Fugazi, or whatever it's called, Fugazi, the Ozempic, and people will start to have issues with digestion and need to increase their fiber content. So there'll be a lot of research about soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and silicon is a good component, along with cellulose, of insoluble fiber in the human diet. Silicon often cross-links cellulose, things like pectin as well. Makes the cell wall stronger, calcium pectate, silicon. So yeah, some non-essential elements that could help with human health if you added them to a fertigation solution, and could be a unique selling point of your crops. There's something to look into if you are a grower of an edible crop. If you're not growing edible crops, of no interest. But if you found it useful, please do leave an Apple Podcast review for Hydroponics Daily. It would help me tremendously. And if you're not on Apple, just make sure you follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And while you're listening to me ramble on these podcasts, check out utrema.co.uk, because as I say, we've got really amazing products that you won't find anywhere else. The technology is completely unique. We're experts in solubilization technology, and biorational fertilizers. Okay, until tomorrow, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.